These strategies offer you perfect sight without glasses, provide cures for health conditions such as glaucoma and cataracts, as well as providing comfort for your weary eyes. Well, at least these were just some of the claims made by the 19th century ophthalmologist Dr. William Horatio Bates. Bates, who developed what was, even by that day standards, a very controversial theory that he then later went on to self-publish as the book The Cure of Perfect Sight by Treatment Without Glasses, also known as Perfect Sight Without Glasses. So you're probably asking yourself, what was so controversial about Bates's theory, and why was he so hated by so many in the eye care and medical field? Well, I'm glad you asked. Dr. William Horatio Bates developed this wild theory that nearly all visual problems could be cured through a series of eye exercises and relaxation techniques. This approach, later known as the Bates method, claims to improve eyes naturally without the need for glasses or contact lenses. But the question is, does it really work? We're going to examine the Bates method in more detail and the scientific thinking that he uses to underpin it all. Be sure to watch till the end for my take on the whole thing and my tip for anybody that wants to try the Bates method. I'll also let you know how you can get access to his book completely free so you can make your own judgment on his method. Now, while some may argue that spectacles are still expensive today, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, spectacles would have been a luxury item and the preserve of the better off financially, if not the out and out wealthy. Dr. Bates perhaps wanted to find a solution to this, and no doubt would have been looked upon as an anti-establishment hero to many looking for a solution to their eye problems at the time. However, we also know that during his professional life, there was a lot of confusion in medicine at the time about how the human eye was able to autofocus. While it had been known for about 2,000 years that humans possess the ability to autofocus through a process that we today call accommodation, it was only in about 1850 that actual proof that accommodation occurred by a change in the outer lens curvature was confirmed. However, for another 50 years, controversy remained about the exact changes in the lens and the precise mechanism of this accommodative process. So being born in 1860 and passing in 1931, it was against this backdrop of medical and ophthalmological frenzy for answers that Dr. Bates came up with his theory and methodology for perfect sight without glasses. So what was his grand idea and where did he get it from? The Bates method is based on the idea that our eyes have the ability to adapt naturally and to heal naturally, and his theory is that poor eyesight is caused by strain and tension in the eyes and also in the mind rather than physical defects in the eye itself. A very bold claim indeed, and there's even more. Dr. Bates' central argument was that the eye's ability to focus is controlled by the external muscles that surround the eyeballs, rather than the internal lens as was conventionally understood even at that time. He believed that chronic long-term tension in these muscles led to optical focusing errors and that relaxing them could restore perfect vision. Now, it's likely that Bates had taken initial inspiration from observations of the eyes of some animal groups that have the ability to focus by elongating their eyeballs or moving their lens forward and backwards like fish eyes. However, the long-standing medical consensus even at the time was that focus is accomplished by the action of the ciliary muscles and the muscles within the eye, which adjust the curvature of the eye's crystalline lens. And in addition to their known function of turning the eyes, Bates maintained that the external human eye muscles also affected the shape and elongated the eyeball to focus at near focus points or shortening to focus at distance. Dr. Bates believed that by relaxing the eyes and practicing certain techniques, people could overcome refractive error like myopia, also known as nearsightedness, hyperopia, also known as farsightedness, astigmatism, and presbyopia, which is the age-related need for reading glasses. So some of the core techniques of the Bates method include the following. Palming, a technique where you cover your eyes with your palms to block out light and promote relaxation. Sunning, where you're instructed to expose your closed eyes to sunlight. The swings, a range of various eye movement exercises. Visualization, techniques involving imagining that you have perfect vision. And also some chart exercises. Supporters claim that these techniques can relax eye muscles, reduce strain, and ultimately improve vision without the need for corrective lenses. Bates does concede that while he believes that most eye problems can be cured with his techniques, very high optical prescriptions can only be reduced. Now, you might probably have guessed that Dr. Bates quickly became an outcast in the eye care and medical professions, who labelled his work pseudoscience due to his theories contradicting the established medical understanding of how the eye focuses light and how some very serious eye conditions can be treated. So what are some of the key arguments against the Bates method? So firstly, modern eye care and ophthalmology recognizes that refractive errors like near and far-sightedness are primarily caused by the shape of the eyeball and the cornea, as well as changes in the lens, and not by the tension of our external eye muscles, whose sole job remains to focus the eyes in a coordinated way. It's also argued that this can be evidenced by the use of drugs like atropine and cyclopentolate that paralyze the lens controlling ciliary muscles, at which point the individual can no longer focus and their near sight is blurred, implying that the external muscles, which are still free to work, are therefore not playing any role whatsoever in focusing. There's also the problem of presbyopia, the condition that we all face from about the age of 45 due to our eyes' aging lens becoming too rigid to focus well, resulting in the need for reading glasses. This shouldn't affect our focus if we indeed relied exclusively on our external eye muscles to help us focus rather than the lens. Additionally, the lack of rigorous peer-reviewed scientific studies demonstrating that Bates' method can cure refractive errors or eliminating the need for glasses is also considered damaging to the methodology. Then there is concerns about the potential risks of the Bates method, with some Bates techniques like sunning, the staring at the sun through closed eyes, can potentially harm the eyes if done improperly. In fact, one of the techniques that undoubtedly did a huge harm to Bates's ideas and credibility was a technique that he called sun gazing, a version of sunning that was initially published in which he advised people to stare at the sun directly through naked eyes for short periods of time. Now, this was clearly sight-threatening and was later revised and vanished from the later edition of the book and replaced with the technique of sunning involving closed eyes instead. Now, it was also claimed by critics that the results reported by the Bates method users were found to be unreliable and inconsistent, with even people reporting subjective improvements in vision, observing that the effects were found to be typically temporary and often not measurable in standard vision tests. Now, you may be thinking, well, if some people were getting some results, then surely there must be something to this. Well, the establishment also had answers to why they thought some people were experiencing any results at all. And these are some of their thinking. Firstly, they proposed that it was just a placebo effect, which is the idea that if you believe that a treatment will work, it can sometimes lead to a perceived improvement, even if there's no actual change. They also suggested that improved visual habits could be one explanation as well. So the idea is that if you're practicing conscious awareness of vision, this may lead to better use of existing eyesight through training, even if visual acuity itself doesn't actually change. And it's also argued that there are perfectly natural fluctuations in our vision through the day due to factors like fatigue, lighting, eye strain, that Bates practitioners may well have wrongly attributed to the effects of the method. Finally, it's also been suggested that the temporary relaxation of our eyes that some of the Bates techniques produce could lead to brief periods of clearer vision without dealing with the underlying refractive error. So what's my take on all of this, and what tips do I have for people that want to try the Bates method? Well, let me play Bates's advocate here for a moment. On the face of everything that I've said here and the rebuttals from his contemporaries and the profession at the time, it's easy to think that Bates was just an eccentric individual with wild ideas, working in a vacuum of his own ideas. However, in reality, this is probably very far from the truth. Just from reading the first few chapters of his book, and if you were to be completely objective, you'd likely conclude that this is a professional that has thoroughly considered the work and the prevailing ideas from other thought leaders of his time before compiling his own ideas. In fact, Bates makes mention and reference to many other works, even if he is mostly putting them down, and he does draw from his own experience of assessing over 30,000 patients. He's also spent time thinking about and trying to respond to the rebuttals of his haters. So on the whole, I do believe him to be totally genuine and perhaps too easily dismissed by his peers of the day. I also think that Bates had some ideas that were perhaps worthy of research funding, but unfortunately some of his wilder ideas that also tarnished his reputation within the profession simply made him unfundable by potential research backers. Cynics will also rightly or wrongly point to protectionism in the eye care profession over their perceived threat by Bates on the industry's ability to profit from selling expensive glasses to the masses as justification for all the hate that Dr. Bates got from the profession. However, we do see that when compelling evidence develops, the eye care profession can adapt, as it has with regards to the way that myopia, for example, develops and is managed in children over the last several years. The Bates method, in comparison, has no new compelling research findings to change long-held thinking on the scientific basis by the profession. In fact, today we enjoy the benefit of technology to image and analyze the structure and the function of the eye with incredible detail that could only have been imagined back in 1860. Now, while this has led to new thinking and optical technology to help control the development of myopia in some, it has only served to highlight and confirm the problem in Bates's thinking. Now, the fundamental flaw that I personally see in Bates's whole premise is around how he came to the conclusion that the external muscles of the eye can assume the role and responsibility of autofocusing for an individual's eye. Now, in reading his book, I did find it interesting and admit that it appears that he might have been onto something when he and some others discovered that patients who had their lenses removed during cataract operations and were left without replacement lenses, as may have been the custom with cataract surgeries in those days, these patients appeared to develop some ability to autofocus. In those experiments, Bates took some measures to isolate the source of the autofocus in these cases by using drugs to paralyze the ciliary muscles and rule out any possibility of these muscles affecting focus when the lens was removed. Bates and others observed that some autofocus was still detectable in this situation, and therefore took this to be confirmation that the only other muscle that could be affecting and acting to create focus was the external muscles of the eyes, which we know to be there for movement alone. The idea is that these muscles would tighten or relax their pressure on the eyeball to enable focus shift. Now, however, in my estimation, removing the lens and not replacing it could potentially cause a structural breakdown in the rigidity of the eyeball, enabling flexibility that would not normally be there when the lens is in place. So furthermore, Bates reports people developing high astigmatism in the following weeks, which may support my thinking on the structural or stiffness breakdown in these eyeballs. So for Bates to then go on and develop a whole methodology of eye exercises to be used by people who mostly won't have had cataract operations performed or their lenses removed appears to be jumping very far ahead of the data in supposing to know how to now treat all eye conditions with your brand of therapy. And of course, modern cataract procedures these days would never leave anybody without a replacement lens, and this could make all assumptions of the Bates method invalid all on its own. So it's clear to me that while his intentions were likely genuine, the Bates method has its foundations firmly built on quicksand. However, that didn't stop many people after him taking his ideas, making it their own, and starting their own movements. In fact, since his book is a public domain book now, anybody can read the book and republish it. And that's why you see many internet marketers rehashing the content of his book to make money out of the content. I'll leave a link in the description box below to where you can get the book completely free, so you don't have to buy it from someone selling the same free public domain version. And I do recommend reading if you're into that. I think it has a lot of interesting theories, and several of the eye exercises may have some benefit when used appropriately. However, I can't support them as a way to fully cure or even partially cure sight problems. Now, my tip for those who want to try the Bates method is to manage your expectations and note your eyes may feel better after doing some of the eye exercises that help circulation and tear flow. But recognize that feeling like your eyes are seeing better and them actually seeing better are two different things. So is Dr. William Horatio Bates the forefather of many misnomers that we hear about the eyes and eye exercises today? Or was he in fact a brilliant scientist crushed by the might of an industry that failed to take him seriously? Let me know what you think of the Bates method in the comment section below. Have you tried it? Do you think it works? Also, let me know if you want me to do a follow-up video talking about the actual method. So until next time, keep your eyes precious with another eye knowledge video from me on this page that YouTube thinks you'll like.